Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another deck profile. Last week, I profiled Marcus's SSG Blue Aggro deck that he took second place with at the San Diego Regional, and in that deck profile, I mentioned that before we came to that version of the deck, we actually had a Skilless Aggro version of the deck that I wanted to share with you guys. This features a lot of the Gohan Skilless stuff from, I think, set 13 or 14, can't exactly remember, but yeah, that stuff's been popular in the SS2 Gohan Leader, as well as Soul Striker, but here we have a build featuring SSG. I think it's a really good build for aggro skillless players. I'm going to share with you guys today. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you don't miss a video. And if you guys want to help support the channel, many ways down in the description to do so. But today, guys, if you want to buy or pre-order any of the cards we talk about in today's video, you can always use my link in the description to TCG Player. Really does help me out quite a bit. Anyways, let's get started. So real quick, just on the leader, I've talked about it a lot at this point, not going to explain what it does really, but I will just reiterate that we think this is the best blue leader for an aggro deck. Yes, you can play this stuff in SS2 Gohan. Yes, you can play this stuff in Soul Striker, but this leader being able to have complete control over your life, also having that backside ability to have a really explosive, pop off kill turn is really, really good. And we are actually able to make use of cards in this deck that would otherwise be dead cards in other types of decks like this, and I'll explain that with this first card. So first thing we have is 4 copies of Nimbus Master. So if you guys watch the profile with Marcus, this basically replaces the 4 of Unbreakable that was in his deck, and this is really where we started with this deck, because the really cool thing is you can use Nimbus Master to play your skillless threats, essentially producing 1-drop 20k attackers. And in this leader, if Nimbus Master's ever dead in your hand, if you have multiple copies that you can't use, you can always discard it, and then it's a sand in your drop area for your awaken condition. So that synergy just makes this leader, again, the best for this type of deck, in our opinion. So really good synergy there. But yes, Nimbus Master is our main turn 1, our main playmaker, setting up a lot of our skillless stuff that we're going to be doing in this deck. Next up, we have Goku Path to Power. So this is a card that we started at 4 of, eventually knocked down to 2, because in this deck there are a lot of non-blue cards and it can make charging very, very awkward. So we decided to cut it down to 2, mostly because of the setup required. Your opponent has to go first. They have to have 2 or more energy for you to be able to play this card. If that wasn't a restriction, I could definitely see this being a 3 of, maybe a 4 of, and we would really try to make this our turn 2 play. But because we can only really rely on it going second, we're playing 2 copies, as well as the fact that you need 2 skillless in the drop, which isn't always going to happen by turn 2. We're only playing so many skillless, so want to make sure it's realistic. But at 2 copies, has been very powerful. It is a bit of a weaker card against red, because this is pretty much Yamcha bait. Like, Yamcha won't really kill the cards you're playing with this, but it will make them unable to attack, threateningly for the most part. And then, of course, if you're playing against the 3-drop units in red decks, they have Videl, which is, again, going to do the same thing. But, I mean, it's still a really good card to play in a deck like this for certain matchups. I mean, is blue going to God Sealing it? If they do, you have plenty of ways to extend your turn and keep going. Green, they can kill one of the cards you're going to play off of this, for example. Yellow, they can rest one of the cards you're going to play off this. But, like, you're still just producing a lot of bodies, and if they go to your next turn with those cards still on your board, you're going to apply a lot of pressure. Next up, we have 4 copies of Skillless Trunks and 2 copies of Skillless Gohan. 6 overall Skillless. This has been totally fine. I mean, we can do some things with them in our hand, but mostly we just want them in the deck for Nimbus Master. But yeah, there are some things we do with them in our hand. Again, like pitch them with our leader. That sets up our Path to Power. So again, in this deck, it's not really that much of a brick if you happen to draw them, because your leader can cycle them and set up some other things. Then we have 2 copies of Gohan Astonishing Strike. 2 copies in a 50-card deck is totally fine for our turn 4 boss monster in my experience. Anytime I saw it early when I was playing 3 copies, I would pitch it or charge it and then possibly not see another copy when I needed it. So 2 copies, if I happen to see it early, I just keep it in my hand. But yes, this is actually a really solid boss monster right now. Being an 8-drop deflect battle card means it's safe from pretty much all counterplays that are commonly found in the meta. It can attack twice, so it gets around a lot of singleton negates, and you're playing blue, so you have answers to floodgates I will talk about later. But yeah, this card, super solid boss monster. I mean, board wipe ramps you up if you don't need to board wipe. It is just a really, really good card. Then we have 2 copies of Chilled Greatest Pirate in the Cosmos. So only 2 copies. A lot of skillless builds that run like this in the past have played 3, but not being a sand is one of the downsides of this deck. You have to heavily consider the cards that you're playing that are not sands and really take great attention to detail with their ratios. But yeah, Chilled's really good in this deck still, because if your opponent's playing a bit of a stallier deck, maybe they're not attacking you enough to where you can get 5 sands in the drop as quickly as you would like to. Chilled is really good in this deck because you can always pitch a skillless, and that could actually get you the next sand you need in your drop area to be able to awaken. So that's really good. We're not playing any 30k skillless because we don't really resolve the pay 1 blue energy of this guy very often. Our opponent is either going to combo out of the leader swing, or they're going to, negate when you attack the unison. It just doesn't come up enough. We started the deck with like 130k Great Saiyaman, but yeah, I mean, if you happen to pull it off, great, you get to play a 20k for one, but if you're probably not going to pull it off. It's just really there for the free body, the free attacker, as well as setting up your Awaken sometimes when you need it to. Then we have 2 copies of Fighting Against Fates and 2 copies of Champa. I mean, same staple-ish type of cards from Marcus's build. This is a lot of times how you're winning the game, just applying free pressure with Bardock and then finishing off with Double Strike. And then, of course, our 4 copies of SS3 Gogeta, the heart and soul of an aggro deck like this. Playing this, Awakening turn 3, using as many Senzu Beans as you possibly can on this guy or any of your other dual attackers is insane value. The -1 also sets up really nice plays in this deck because we're actually playing 2-drop Skilless. You'll remember from Marcus's build, we did have a neat play with Gogeta and a Janemba over here that we'll talk about later. But yeah, this deck sets it up a lot more easily because there are actually Skilless battle cards to play from our hand that are 2-drop Saiyans. 3 copies of God Sealing. You can definitely tweak the ratios on this. I brought it up to 3 because in Marcus's build we talked about playing 3. That was probably the right number. I think he only played 2 in that build if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, 3 is fine. Pitch it early if you don't need it, but it's also good for answering floodgates. Since you are playing an aggro deck, you don't want to get stopped by cards like Riposte, cards like Oceanus, stuff like that. Our 4 super combos, of course, and our 4 Senzu Bean, the heart and soul of the deck. Main reason why I want this deck to be 50 cards is because I want to find every single copy of Senzu Bean that I can throughout a game, because it just allows you to keep being aggressive and keep extending your returns. And then 3 copies of Realm of the Gods, Beerus. Yeah, we're not playing Unbreakable in this deck, and this is one of the main differences between this build and Marcus's build from last week. This deck is not quite as high on combo power, without the Unbreakables drawing you cards, and we're not playing UI Kamehameha in this deck either. I did want to have 3 copies because defensively this is a really nice defensive card. One other thing I want to mention is that in this build we're not playing Dimension Magic. That was what we were trying before we kind of got off this build for the competitive aspect. We weren't playing Dimension Magic, we just wanted to be full on aggressive, and if we needed to untap, we had our Senzu Beans, we also had our leader's ability to untap defensively if we absolutely needed it. And we're not playing as many cards that need energy to combo in this deck. So no D-Magic feels okay, but of course you can always add 2 to 3 copies if you want to be a little bit safer. But sometimes when you're playing an all-gas aggro deck, you don't really want negates. You just want to go full, gas to the ground and just kill your opponent. 3 copies of Goku Calamity Challenger. Again, one of the best cards in a deck like this. Just a 1 energy 15k that draws a card. It does lethal damage. It is very good. 3 copies of Borgos. So one thing I want to mention here is that before we ever started playing this Borgos card, it is really good because it's a 1-drop barrier, so it baits out a lot of things, especially in the Yellow Trunks matchup where they have the Trunks blocker. You play this, they can't rest it, they can't Poutine you, they can't Bergamo you. You just basically blank that effect for 1 energy and you draw a card. And it's also a Saiyan, which of course is very important. The other thing we were playing before this was Isekai Keeping Watch. That was a card we very much wanted to main deck in a deck like this, but again, the one downside to this leader, that card is not a Saiyan, so we found that it was just way too difficult to discard Saiyans in the early game without such a high Saiyan count. So that's pretty much why we stopped playing that card in the main. Definitely want to consider sideboarding it though. Borgos has been quite good though. The barrier is very nice. Then we have 1 copy of Baby Hatch. Funny enough, we actually were playing Pan for a while because we weren't really concerned about Baby Hatch's Floodgate effect or Pan's Floodgate effect. We were really just liking the fact that Pan could be played for free to help us kill our opponent on like a turn 3 or turn 4 if we needed it. But there were some matchups where they were, very strong defensively. We had a hard time actually killing them, so we did end up going back to the Baby Hatch. But I will just say it is very viable in this deck to play Pan. Maybe even Supreme Kai of Time SCR for the 1-drop 40k attacker aspect. You can play a lot of different SCRs in this deck. You don't necessarily need to be playing Baby Hatch if you don't have access to it. The other ones are viable because they're very aggressive. More so aggressive than Baby Hatch actually is. And then the final thing is 4 copies of Go 10 the Interceptor. Another change I made based off Marcus's list. Just a 1-drop, take a life attacker that can push some early damage. The problem with this deck, as well as Marcus's version, is that you have a hard time winning the game if your opponent is able to defend early. So a 1-drop 15k is oftentimes going to force some damage through, as simple as that. I was playing Sand Instincts in earlier builds of this deck, but I noticed that card slowed me down a bit too much, meaning that like my turn 2 I could spend drawing 2 cards, but I wasn't actually doing any damage, and that was a big problem for this build. Like I just mentioned, you need to be pushing early damage through to actually, win the game in a timely manner. The longer the game goes on, you're not necessarily favored. You start running out of gas, so we really do want to win on like turn 4. if quite possible. And a big thing to do as leader is, you know, you'll play your Astonishing Strike, and then you use your leader's untap, and then the additional untap to make sure you can open up your Senzu Beans, maybe some of your 1 energy threats. It's just a really, really strong kill turn, and you know, pushing that early damage is quite important. But yeah, that's the deck list, guys. I wanted to share it because I actually got a few questions and requests for it ever since I mentioned it in that profile. So hope you guys enjoy it. Check back for the pinned comment when I get a chance. I will post a link to this deck list down there like I usually do. Anyways, let me know in the comments below what you think about the deck. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.